First of all, welcome to Autistic Pride Online 2021. This video is for Autistic Pride Reading, and we've appreciated your generous support and interest over the years. As you know, we are huge Anne fans, and to me personally, you have many labels as advocate, national trainer, advisor on autism, researcher, both for MA and the personal research for your blog, which I always recommend to everybody, and friend. How would you describe yourself?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. It's absolutely lovely to be here. A delight to support the charity in any way I currently can.
Thank you.
Oh gosh, how would I describe myself? Well, I'm an autistic mum. I've got a fantastic autistic son who now works alongside me sometimes on various
Autistic son.
and we're part of an all autistic family, which is lovely. Glad to be part of many organisations, but want to make it clear that what I'm saying today is just my personal view. I'm not in any way trying to represent any of the organisations for whom I currently work or who I've worked with in the past, because I just need to be a bit clear about that. And yeah, just delighted to be working also with so many people in the world of academia now, having done 3 years of postgrad studies so far, probably with another 2 or 3 or maybe 4 or 5 ahead of me. Goodness me, it's exciting times.
It is. And I can't wait, because every single thing you do, I love your blog. I mean, I share it. The PBS and ABA one is one I've shared so many times, and obviously other bits of it as well, but particularly that one I think is incredibly useful. And you know what I didn't do in true autistic fashion? I forgot to introduce you by name. So I will just say this is Anne Memmott, because I didn't do that bit. Anyway, on to the next question. Today, we're going to be discussing ABA, or Applied Behavioural Analysis, plus its sibling, PBS, or Positive Behavioural Support. How would you define ABA? And is it true that Lovers defined autistic people as less than human?
Wow, that's 2 very good questions. I'm going to take them one at a time.
Awesome.
How would I define ABA? Well, personally, I describe it as a fairly extreme philosophy, which basically believes that people are behaviours, and we can watch the behaviour, guess exactly why they're behaving that way, and then alter their behaviour to make them behave in a different way.
Yep.
It's a really strange way of looking at people, I think, but that is its core principle. And it always believes that people have 4 main reasons for doing something. For example, that they've got sensory reasons, or they want to escape from a demand, or they're attention seeking, or they want to get a reward of some sort, whether it's a drink or a food stuff or a bit of time off or whatever. And so they use a sort of system of reward and punishment in which they find out what, for example, a young person likes and use that to tempt them into behaving more normally, or they punish them by taking it away from them, and claim, in this particular instance, that this is the sort of thing that should be done to children. It's very difficult, actually. I don't think it majors on things like trust, on relationship, on respect. It doesn't really believe in communicating with us, because it's all about just observing our behaviours. And if a child screams or sobs, well, they're just making a noise, and it's a noise to get attention or to do one of these other things. It's very detached, very unemotional. And why on earth would someone only have 1 of 4 reasons to do something? There might be any number of other reasons, or multiple reasons. Oh, do excuse me.
That's interesting. I know this isn't one of the questions we've got, but I'd just like to ask you, because it is the humanity question, because all the things that you're talking about are very real and very human ways of reacting, and by kind of reducing them down to 1 or 2, well, 1 reason only for behavior, it is reducing humanity, isn't it? Even if I mean, I know there is that quote that we might discuss, that we will discuss, about Lovers defining autistic people as less than human. Even just that the way of looking at it does that, doesn't it? Even if you want to, as a philosophy, to say, right, okay, we've moved away from when he said that horrible thing, but actually it's at the core of its very being. So they can't move wholly away from it, or even at all, because it's the basis of everything they're doing.
Exactly so. And I know you had asked me about Ivor Lovelace and his particular stance on things. And of course, he was one of the founders of ABA, not the only founder, but he was certainly very instrumental. Lots of people still follow his work. And in all the reference papers you get around this, you'll see constant references directly to him or indirectly through other papers. So as you say, it's extremely common. If you look at his past history, was very charismatic, you know, a real charmer. He knew how to persuade. And very violent. I don't want to go into this here because it's a very triggering thing, but very violent man. That's how he got a lot of his results. And he had this fantastic quote. Well, fantastic in as much as we can go, oh my goodness, what is this? This was in a particular interview he did in 1974. And he said, you see, you start pretty much from scratch when you work with an autistic child. You have a person in the physical sense, and they have hair and a nose and a mouth, but they're not people in the psychological sense. One way to look at the job of helping autistic kids is to see it as a matter of constructing a person. You have the raw materials, but you have to build the person. That's what he said. So as far as he was concerned, we're not exactly human beings, not unless we've had his special technique and have been made into them. It's a very strange philosophy. Whichever else you say about it, I don't like it at all.
Yeah. And it doesn't centre the child at all, does it? It just centres the person doing the doing, which is other quite interesting thing, because I think, you know, certainly from what we do as parents is we put the kids first, or the kids' needs first, you know, as a sensory needs, etc., etc. And they're not an attempt to manipulate. Not that I would know how to, but anyway. Next question. I've read ABA can be used all over the world in a variety of settings, even in traffic control situations. Some of it seems quite innocuous, but it has a terrible reputation in the autism community. Can you explain more about this, please?
Oh, well, I can try.
Thank you.
When research has been done, actually asking autistic people, it's very, very difficult to find people who are in favour of this. And we've got a number of studies, we've got a number of proper formal research papers, we've got an awful lot of polls, blogs, journals, books, you name it, we've got autistic people discussing this everywhere. Not just autistic people who can use spoken language, not just autistic people who are quote unquote high functioning, a term, but autistic people absolutely all over the proverbial spectrum. For example, the work that Chris Bonello did back in 2015, he did a big survey for his website. Autistic Not Weird is the website, if you Google. And he got thousands of responses, and autistic people did not want this used on children. And in that survey sample were lots of people who also have intellectual disabilities. They were not in favour of ABA. So it's very problematic. And we've got serious concerns about a number of elements of it. Just going to list some of them here very briefly, otherwise we will be here for a fortnight.
Nobody wants that.
Nobody wants that. Sooner or later, I'll need more tea. For example, extremist beliefs. I had someone who contacted me last week and said they were in conversation with a behaviourist. It's someone who's a qualified behaviourist, and they said, well, we mustn't teach the children how to say or how to sign the word no, because otherwise they'll think that they can say it or sign it, and they mustn't be allowed to say no. They must only do as they're told. And this person ended up in quite a discussion. I'm going to use the word discussion. Argument might be another word, with this other contact of mine who said, what are you talking about? Of course they have the right to say no. It's a fundamental human right to be able to say no to things that are distressing or things that are harmful. Whatever is that about? Then the lack of working with autistic people. Generally, it's an industry that does things to us. It doesn't necessarily look to do things with us. And I find that deeply concerning, because it's like doing research on females and saying, well, we're only going to have it done by males, because obviously they know what proper behavior is like, and they have to make the females behave exactly like males because that's the right way to be. Really? Yeah.
It would be problematic. Absolutely. Yes.
The same.
Yes.
There's also this thing which, well, I think we're going to come back to later, about the damage it's doing to some autistic people. And this is from their own accounts, and lots of their own accounts, where they have talked about things like feeling traumatized by some of it, of having really low self-esteem, because they're made to feel like they are nothing more than a puppet to be moved by someone else. Learned helplessness, where they're not learning to solve problems, they're just learning to do as they're told. And that isn't how you learn, that's just rote learning. You can't necessarily apply that to something else. Other concerns we've got, glossing over the subject of targeting of autistic people who speak out against it, and we do get some of that.
Yes, we've discussed that.
We have had a big paper just coming out about the lack of ethics.
Yes.
They just don't even mention it in most of their research papers. It's not in there. We also have, excuse me again, a lack of consent. They'll ask a parent, perhaps. They hardly ask the autistic person. We're not relevant. We don't have an insight into our own condition. Therefore, why would they ask us? Yeah, it's that kind of thinking. Well,
it's terrifying. The blog, the article you showed recently about the young autistic lad being subjected to noise, just so that his sounds could be measured, his sounds of distress could be measured. One person, no scientific value whatsoever, and not able to give full consent, I think, from the criteria surrounding it. Absolutely appalling, but held up as good ABA research. Okay.
A lot of this single case study as well, where they will hold up as evidence what they've done to one particular child or one particular young person. Well, that's not really evidence of anything. You haven't got control there. You haven't got a big sample.
No, absolutely.
Telling you anything about what happened in that room, we don't know.
No, not at all. I can say
a lot of concerns. Lack of training as well. Should I mention that one? Where you only have to have 40 hours of training to do this work pretty much unsupervised, or if you get supervision, it's kind of once a month from an hour. And they're pretending to be able to do some really useful psychological manipulation of children on the basis of 40 hours. They've never even met an autistic child before a lot of the time.
Yeah.
How can that be okay? Just extraordinary. And people pay a fortune. The parents are actually having to pay a fortune to have a completely untrained person in their room pretending they know what they're doing, basically.
We nearly did it with one of my children, and thankfully a friend who knew about it put us off and pointed out it was exactly like dog training. And then I looked at videos and was watching one today of a little girl, and I saw the same thing around about the same time, and someone put a marshmallow in front of her, count up, to teach her waiting skills, and then if she wanted the marshmallow before the allotted time was up, they forced her hand away. And I thought, goodness me, you know, if you're not able to say no, she wasn't able to say no, and you've got forced physical contact in quite an enclosed setting, it's very, very concerning. And this was the good ABA, because she was getting rewarded with something she liked. Anyway.
Yeah, that worries me, because if you're using that kind of reward system where, for example, children are given endless sweets if they do a particular task, what are you teaching them about their diet and about how they feel in the way of hunger? What are you teaching them about dental hygiene? You know, it's whatever's going on in the minds of the people that are coming up with this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Next question. I think one of the blog posts I shared most of yours is the ABAPBS one. Embarrassingly, it took me ages to get the link between PBS and the picture of the peanut butter sandwich, but we'll gloss over that. And could you explain the link between ABA and PBS, please?
Yeah, I can try, although it's a good deal of academic debate on this one at the moment. PBS is based on ABA.
Right.
Its foundation, and it's very clear about that. If you look through the research literature, if you go on the training courses, it's ABA based.
Yep.
Positive behaviour support has evolved, if you like, from ABA. Admittedly, it's gone down a slightly different path, a slightly more human rights based and person-centered path, but it still basically believes that autistic people are simply slightly broken versions of other people, and that other people are there to teach them the proper way to behave. And unless we are taught, we won't know how to behave. Goodness. And you get very, very strange ideas about how we're supposed to look, how we are supposed to conduct ourselves, and we have to be a certain way, otherwise we can't have good things. And it's deeply problematic. And again, they've spent 30 years on this, and they've only just started having conferences that say, should we have invited some autistic people to consult with? We don't know. I've actually watched some of these. I've watched some of these conferences. That has been the discussion. Should we invite some autistic people? They've just thought of it just now. Again, it worries me so much.
Yeah.
Being clear that I work with some really good PBS teams, people who have said, okay, well, actually, we don't much like the behaviourist side. What we're going to do is start from person-centred and start from trauma-informed.
Absolutely.
And from collaborating and listening. Yeah. And they are fantastic. So please don't think that I'm being negative about all PBS.
No. That was going to be a question, sorry, that we're going to come on, which I won't ask you now, but it was just that the PBS has changed in its nature, and it's important to try and recognise the different types. Is there a way that someone like me, who has very little knowledge really, could spot the differences, or if you're a parent going in?
It's mostly about how we are treated. What I will find is if people are using the old ABA system, it depends if they think that you're non-autistic. If they think you're non-autistic, they will be tremendously salesperson-like. You know, if you go into one of those posh cast showrooms and it's glossy brochures and marvelous files and perfectly manicured people who will bring you in and tempt you to an Aston Martin or something. I wish. Yeah.
Yeah. Hasn't happened to me personally, but probably possibly because I can't drive. So there we go.
Yeah, perhaps they shouldn't be tempting you just yet.
No, for normal people who can drive, anybody who can drive, yes.
Whereas if you go into what I call a purist behaviourist setting and they know you're autistic, they won't even speak to you. Or if
that's stark, really.
That's stark. And that's in the purist behaviourist settings. Obviously, there's a bit of what I call a grey area in between where people's opinions vary. But I spent years working with ABA teams who would not speak to me at all because they did not have my behaviour plan, and therefore they wouldn't know the correct ways to engage with me. So they simply did not. I was there as a national advisor.
You're a national treasure, I think, for the autistic community myself. So yes, that's outrageous.
Yeah, it was jolly strange. I should think I'll just leave it like that.
Okay.
So often. And it is exactly that they believe that autistic people can only be communicated with if you have the proper plan and you know precisely what the person's own team is trying to achieve with them, because otherwise you might mess up their plan.
Goodness. Oh, yes, again, it's not person-centred, it's plan-centred.
Plan-centred, yes.
Plan-centred, yes. Plan-centred training. Next question. Is it true that ABA not only causes no noticeable differences as opposed to what you might expect to see naturally in terms of someone's development, but that it also causes PTSD, and why?
Yeah,
I know it's a huge question.
It's almost two questions, so I wonder if I can do it as two. We've had a lot of really big research happening around this because, of course, people are spending billions on it in other countries, especially where it is a standard approach for autistic children and young people. Rightly or wrongly, I mean, you can guess my views, but some people say, hey, this seems to work. Does it work though? Because we have such a thing as a Cochrane review, and these are the big international audits where they look at all the evidence and go, how good is this evidence? Who did it? You know, could they have been being a bit biased about it? You know, did they do this properly? Have they looked at whether it was the treatment that did it, or whether the children just grew up and naturally developed those skills? They could not find evidence of it doing anything useful for behaviour. And they looked and looked. It just, and they thought, well, this is really strange. And so we had the big study that was done over in America with the military. And they contacted thousands of military families with autistic children and young people, and they evaluated whether the ABA training was doing something. And it wasn't. There wasn't any difference. Some improved, some got worse, some stayed the same. All they could see was a vague improvement over time that they would have expected if the kids had just grown up a bit. And it worried the military an awful lot. They're going, well, we're spending countless dollars on this, and there's no evidence of it working. So there's something very odd going on, because you will hear from ABA people that it is gold standard, that there is an evidence base. But when you look for the actual evidence, it's like chasing mist. You can't find the evidence of it doing something. Now, what's the second half of our question?
Sorry, yes. What about it would cause PTSD? I know there is a famous paper by Henny Kupfenstein that said, I think it was 3/4 of children that went through it, self-reported, developed PTSD from something like that.
There is a famous paper. Some would say it's very preliminary research, because
absolutely,
they've reported it. Obviously, that's not exactly the same as concluding that ABA caused it. So we've got all sorts of teams now looking at this, and we've got more and more people coming forward now to say, actually, yeah, it was, you know, especially when people start hitting adult years, they've come through ABA, they're now self-reporting and saying, you know, this isn't okay. What on earth has happened to me? So I'm really grateful for more teams coming forward now who want to do this professionally. But we have to tread so carefully, because when you're trying to do research around people who've suffered trauma, the last thing you want to do is re-traumatize them. And there's every possibility of that. So I can understand why we're pacing this and taking it really slow and trying to work all the time within people's boundaries. Because if there's something very wrong here, which we think there is, we need to make sure we're not re-damaging people who may have already experienced damage.
Very important, yeah. And they've finally got a sense of, oh goodness me, I can't think of the right word, self-empowerment, haven't they? So it's really really important not to take that away. Last couple of questions, because we've been talking for quite some time now. I will say, I'm going to swap around the last two. So I'm going to ask, why are attitudes toward autism so hard to change? And then I'm going to ask you, why do autistic people learn, if that's all right, because I thought that would be quite...
Why are attitudes so hard to change? I think it's because people were given the wrong information right at the start. And if we go right the way back to the 1940s, with a couple of blokes who sat down and went, oh, look, there's a young, white, autistic, mostly young boys, to be honest with you, person who is behaving in a very strange way. There must be something terribly wrong with them. So we're going to describe it as having no social skills and being terribly rigid and having no empathy. And ever since then, every single paper has repeated that as fact. For many, many decades, no one had ever bothered asking us. No one had ever bothered researching it because it was given as a fact. 2 men had said it, therefore it must be true. It's a very strange way of doing research. And it hasn't been until very recently for people to go, hold on, is it true? Has anyone checked? They started asking autistic people. They asked us if we were broken in our social skills and found out that actually most of us have very good social skills with other autistic people. And what we were looking at was a mismatch of understanding, a double empathy problem where both non-autistic and autistic people were speaking different social languages, were misunderstanding each other's cues, misunderstanding how each other then communicated concern. And when we're enabled to communicate, goodness me, what a depth of empathy there is. We've also re-established what the purpose is of these rigid behaviors, to quote a phrase. Understandably, people don't want to be overwhelmed. Our sensory system is different. Our social system is different. We're often taking in too much information. So we need to be careful with that. And if someone suddenly goes, oh, we're going down the pub now, how are you going to plan for that? How are you going to make sure that your brain is kept operational if you can't think to yourself, well, hold on, I've already done a load of stuff today. What's just about to happen? Have I got brain capacity to do this? It's no wonder that an awful lot of autistic people will just go, whoop, no, I'm not going to the pub, I'm staying right here. Cheers. With or without COVID in the background. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes, yes, absolutely.
I'm staying right here. Yeah. But it's that kind of thing where we've unpicked it. And also stimming, you know, where we will flap, we will rock, you know, I do sometimes. In fact, there's normally one part of me that's on the move all the time, but people don't notice because I've learned to disguise it because I had so many years where I wasn't diagnosed. And I still disguise it even when I don't have to. Masking. And we've realized that this is such a good way for people to relax, to center themselves, to find where their body is. Some will flicker their fingers in front of their face as a way to measure distance, because that's how their eyes are calculating how far apart they are. An ABA comes in and says, no, you've got to stay really still, because that's better. And it actually isn't much better. We've asked autistic people if it's much better, and nearly every single one of them, and there were hundreds of answers, said, no, it is not much better, thank you. It is awful.
Yeah.
So if only they'd asked in the first place, wouldn't that have been good? Yeah, so we've had just all these myths to unpick, and we're gradually getting there. We're understanding through teams like Crompton and Fletcher Watson, who work up in Edinburgh, and they've done such fantastic work recently with autistic people, where they set up 3 rival teams, as it were, and some tasks. And the autistic team were given the task and raced through it. And then there was a non-autistic team and they raced through it. And then they tried mixing and matching. So they had one of each. And to use a phrase, all heck broke loose. No one understood each other. It was a complete mismatch. Even though they were the same intelligent people, by the time they put the autistic and the non-autistic people together, anything could happen. And they went, oh, this is really interesting. So who's broken then? Wait, neither team is broken. What happened is it broke when they tried mixing them. We need to learn to communicate better together, both sets of people. And
absolutely,
it's the autistic people who are expected to do 100% of the work. And that is not right. It's the same deaf community as well. You know, they have their own language, their own culture, and it's fantastic. So many years they were taught to stay really still and try to pretend they can hear, more or less. That's more or less what we've been through.
Yeah.
That's a little bit of the background of why. Quite a long answer. Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us. It was an absolute pleasure. I would say to anybody watching this, please read Anne's blog because it's fantastic, and do follow her on Twitter because, again, you know, the research that you come up with, I'm not very active on Twitter, but I always read a lot more than actually comment on, because the research and your way of describing it is just fantastic, I think, and invaluable to us all. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Great pleasure.